Hi, hope you're doing well. In this last talk, I plan to focus on revising poems. And I definitely hope this won't be the last talk like this that I give, because I've really been enjoying these. And I definitely hope you have too. I had this idea when I came to revising poems that somewhere in my mind, heart, subconscious, somewhere, was the perfect version of the poem that I had started writing, and that if I would keep working on the poem, I would get to it. Sort of like the story of Michelangelo. Maybe I've maybe heard it told about different artists. How did you come up with that sculpture? I just cut away everything that wasn't it, and that has not been my own personal experience with revising poems. Um, I really can't remember so far in revising poems getting to a point with the poem where I could just see, okay, this is what I was going for all along. Um, I have sometimes come to a point with poems where intuitively something has told me this is it. But even then, that's kind of been more in hindsight. Um, and it's been really like, okay, I sent out earlier versions of this poem that kind of felt right. They didn't get published. I send out this version that kind of feels right or righter. It gets published, and I have other projects I'm hoping to move on to. So, yes, that was the final version. Um, and what it's really helped me to go back to is what I believe is contained in the word revise, which is see again. That when I revise a poem, I'm having a new experience with it. And it helps me to see a new draft of the poem as a new poem. Um, and it might be uh, fleshing out things that were developed in in an earlier draft, but it is a new experience for me. And that has really left me open to um, letting the poem grow in drastically new directions sometimes. Um, and that ends up being really good for me as a poet. Maybe not always good for the poem. And sometimes I've made drastic changes and then gone back to an earlier version that has seemed right, more right. But it's really helped me to have a lot of fun with revision. Um, I get way more enjoyment personally out of treating treating the new draft as a new experience than I do trying to correct mistakes. Being trying to be in that mode with the poem, because I could really drive myself crazy. Just looking for anything that might be wrong with a particular poem, but looking at ways that this poem could grow. When I'm able to do that, it's fun, it's adventure, and I got a really helpful experience with revision when I got to take a workshop or take be in a workshop with that was taught by Stephen Dobyns, a wonderful poet, and he looked a at my poem, and the way he put it uh, was too many inches of whipped cream. And it was um, that that really helped me to hear because I had been trying to make the poem, I don't know, sort of pop might be the right word. Um, I've been trying to make it sound as good as possible, basically. Just do as much stuff to it as I could to bring out like what felt like the music in it, and it was a good experience trying that, but it was missing depth, and um, it was a poem about family history, and it's interesting for me looking back because um, it was called "Prayer to My Brother," if I remember right, and it was sort of playing with this idea that it's possible to uh, put a family member on a pedestal, um, or anybody. But what I found, uh, actually a number of years later, was there were a bunch of poems underneath that one that were about my family's experience on a farm, small farm outside of Troy, Missouri. Helps that it has that Homeric name of Troy. Um, that probably helped me write poems about it. But poems focused on that territory ended up really taking on ideas about God, about the divine, that I had had as a kid that were really difficult. This idea of a punishing God, those kinds of things. That I don't know. Maybe they were just sort of genetically in me or something. But going deeper than the whipped cream was was a really helpful thing for me. And that was a pretty long journey. From this one poem to a number of years later, a group of poems that I hope will turn into a book. Um, it's still in progress, but um, I've had other experiences of revising where, well, one in particular, I didn't do much to this poem, and it was the one poem of mine that was in a Best American Poetry anthology. Um, it was it came to me the way I remember it anyway. It came to me almost the way it ended up in a journal in the Kenron Review, and then in this really neat anthology, which is a real gift and an honor to have that happen in 2007. Um, and I didn't do much to it that I remember. It maybe took a little bit of trying again. Even then, I believe I had to sort of come back to it, or got to come back to it as a new poem. Because if I remember right, it almost seemed like the final version was less rigid, almost more liquid, which is a strange way to say it, maybe, but just flowed more. Um, and Yeah, that was kind of how it felt to me. And I guess that leads me to another thing about revision. And Rodney Jones helped me with this once when he said he didn't believe it's ever really possible to know if a poem is good or not. Um, I revise from in here as a writer. I can pretend to be a reader for sure, and maybe as I continue to revise a poem, I get more objectivity about it, but still, ultimately, I've got my own inner experience of working on the poem, and a lot of it, it's by intuition, it's by feel, it's by guesswork, it's mysterious, and that's only frustrating to me when, not if, but when um, I'm obsessed with a certain result that usually has to do with, man, I really want people to like this or love this, and I want it to get published in that place or that place. But when I'm focused on the process, it ends up being a wonderful thing that I can't see my own poems from the outside. That revision is really about what else can this poem tell me about me, um, and that can mean it tells me about other things too. The the poem of mine that I've had the most fear of revising for about 10 years now is this epic. It's about 10,000 lines, heroic couplets, rhyming 10-syllable iambic pentameter lines. Um, and I, yeah, I've kind of been staring at it for 10 years, going like, what did I get myself into? Because it just sort of came out, I don't know, in this 10,000 line form over a year, maybe a year and a half, something like that. Um, but as I've started to look at it, maybe I finally sat down, maybe and read it all the way through for the first time in 2015, something like that. Like a few years after I'd just been sort of carrying it around on flash drives and stuff. But as I've looked at it more, I've been able to see myself in it more. I've been able to see the influences of other writers in it more on me. Um, and to some extent, it's about trauma. And I'm one of those poets who has PTSD. Um, and so it's ended up being informative, just starting to look at it more, with an eye toward what could this turn into. And for me, there's that phrase "kill your darlings" that certainly works for other writers, and I'm very glad about that. For me, it doesn't work. I've got to love my poems, uh, and maybe that means they don't end up as good. I'm okay with that because they are they are like my kids in a way, or things that I've grown, parts of me that end up going out into the world to whoever. So I love them, and revision ends up being more of showing them love. And I have loved doing these talks, and I wanted to thank you once again for watching. Take care.